From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
A federal jury returns a quick guilty verdict for Hunter Biden on 3 felonies for buying and possessing an illegal gun in 2018. Will Hunter appeal? Is a pardon waiting in the West Wing? And what does this case say about the American justice system? Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnists Kim Strassel and Bill McGurn. After a little more than 3 hours of deliberations, a jury in Wilmington, Delaware on Tuesday morning reached a verdict on 3 charges: 1, lying to a federally licensed gun dealer; 2, making a false claim on a federal firearms application; and 3, possession of an illegally obtained gun for 11 days in 2018. The speed of this verdict seemed to take everybody by surprise. There were apparently reporters that were outside the courthouse who then raced and created a security bottleneck, and the First Lady, Jill Biden, was not able to get into the courthouse before the jury verdict was read. Here's a piece of the statement from Hunter Biden's attorney, Abby Lowell. "We respect the jury process as we have done throughout this case. We will continue to vigorously pursue all the legal challenges available to Hunter," unquote. President Biden with his own statement: "I am the president, but I am also a dad. Jill and I love our son, and we are so proud of the man he is today. So many families who have had loved ones battle addiction understand the feeling of pride, seeing someone you love come out the other side and be so strong and resilient in recovery," unquote. And then here's a piece of the statement from the special counsel, the Justice Department prosecutor David Weiss, at a press conference.
"This case was about the illegal choices defendant made while in the throes of addiction, his choice to lie on a government form when he bought a gun, and the choice to then possess that gun. It was these choices and the combination of guns and drugs that made his conduct dangerous. Second, no one in this country is above the law. Everyone must be accountable for their actions, even this defendant. However, Hunter Biden should be no more accountable than any other citizen convicted of this same conduct. The prosecution has been and will continue to be committed to this principle and to the principles of federal prosecution in carrying out its responsibilities."
Kim, what do you make of the verdict, and does the shortness of the deliberations suggest that the jurors thought this was a pretty easy case on the facts and on the law?
It shouldn't have surprised anybody, and it was indeed an easy case on the facts and the law. The law is very clear. It says, are you a user of illicit substances? You are not supposed to buy a gun if you are using those substances, if you are an addict. He checked the box saying no, he wasn't, and said so as much in other forms to the gun dealer. And when you look at the evidence that the prosecution provided of his ongoing addiction at that time, it was overwhelming. There was not only the in-person testimony from Hunter's ex-wife and 2 prior girlfriends, but also a lot of this was backed up by texts and emails, bank records, Hunter's own memoir describing his struggles with addiction throughout 2018, which was when this purchase happened. I think the only reason that there was any doubt about this is, one, was because most defendants, by the way, wouldn't even fight a case like this. They would plead guilty up front and ask for leniency from the court. And by the way, I think had Hunter done that, this was a first-time offense. It's a nonviolent offense, and you get a lot of credit if you stand in front of the court and accept responsibility for the crime, which you did. Instead, he got Abby Lowell, a high-flying defense attorney, who decided to take this to court. And the arguments were oddly twofold. One, it was trying to convince the jury that Hunter Biden, we should feel sympathy for him because he was a drug addict. At the same time, trying to make the case that essentially that if you didn't have video of Hunter Biden smoking crack at the gun dealer's table at the moment he was doing this, and purchasing the gun, there was somehow some sort of reasonable doubt that he was an addict at that very moment. And I think the jury was very smart. They understood that that is not the definition that is applied to anybody else who goes into these cases. The law was clear. And as a result, as we know, it took less than 3 hours for them to unanimously come up with a verdict.
I am also not surprised by this verdict, given the evidence and the clarity of the evidence. Hunter Biden, remember, wrote a memoir and read the audiobook of the memoir himself. And pieces of that were played in court, apparently, where he is talking about the drug addiction that he was struggling with during the time period that we're talking about. And so, Bill, any other outcome would have been, I think, surprising and maybe raised some doubts about the possibility of getting fair justice. It's true that Delaware is a blue jurisdiction. It went 59% for President Biden in 2020. And it's also the home base of the Bidens, longtime senator there and his son. So it is good, I think, that you could still get impartial justice in a jurisdiction like that. And Bill, part of the dynamic here is that jurors are instructed when they go into the jury deliberation room that if you find that the defendant's actions violated the law, you are required to return a conviction. But there's also something called jury nullification, where you have one recalcitrant juror who says, no, I don't think that this is fair. I don't think this should be the law. And so they refuse to go along with a guilty verdict. And so you end up with a hung jury. And I suppose that was a possibility in this case.
Yeah, I think that's what they were betting on. I mean, that's why Jill Biden was sitting in the courtroom and the other Bidens, to create sympathy. And just all you need is one juror to have doubts or to say, yes, the law finds him guilty, but I think, he's an addict. There's other reasons. Kim rightly mentioned the overwhelming facts of the case mitigated against Hunter Biden's claim. But the defenses were really ridiculous, as Kim kind of alluded to. The first is that Hunter didn't identify as an addict at the moment he was signing that form. I mean, this is a guy whose other misdeeds, getting chucked out of the Navy, his massive drug use, working on foreign accounts, taking money over. He wants to be excused for that because he wasn't himself. He was a drug addict. But then on the one thing where we know he did, he wants to say, I wasn't a drug addict at that time. It's interesting. He went to Yale Law, as Bill Clinton did, and they both did the is defense based on the verb to be. Depends what you mean by the word is. And for Hunter, it was, am I an addict the moment I'm signing this? For Bill Clinton, it was, is their affair now ongoing with Monica? And the jury didn't buy it because, as Kim said, the evidence was so overwhelmingly against him. I always thought that he should have settled even after his plea deal broke up. A settlement would have looked like contrition, and I think he would be in a better position to avoid prison if he had settled before, even if he didn't get the sweetheart deal that he got before.
Hang tight. We'll be right back in a moment. Welcome back. Let's start with a clip of juror number 10, as he is identified, speaking to Fox News about his view of the case and what went on in the jury deliberations.
Nobody's above the law, no matter who you are. And so that did not play a factor in my decision. It was not politically motivated, if you want to know that. Politics played no part in this whatsoever.
Kim, how concerned were you about the idea of this kind of jury nullification? And you heard the juror there saying that politics played no role in this. How much do you think that shores up confidence in the justice system that you can have a federal jury in Delaware convict the president's son?
I was pleasantly surprised. And the fact that I am surprised, I think, is a testament to some of the worries that so many people have these days as you go into these trials of well-known political figures, and the fear that it is politics that's going to play in the courtroom and not the facts, not the law, not the evidence. So I think this should be incredibly heartening. And I think a bunch of people actually get credit here. I think the jury does, not only for that attitude that you just heard expressed, which is that they looked at this person who was sitting in the defendant chair. They decided to treat him like any other defendant that you would have. By the way, I would note that that's even a little harder in Wilmington, where this court case was taking place. Delaware is the stomping ground of the Biden family. They have enormous political influence. We saw from the jury's selection how many people ended up getting dismissed, random folks that have been called for jury service because they knew the Bidens in some capacity or another. Their family member had interacted with them in some way or another. So this is a small community where the Bidens have outsized influence. As Bill noted, they were sitting there in the courtroom every day looking at the jury. I think that might have been partly for sympathy, but I think it might have been also a reminder to the jury where they were and the Bidens' prominence. And they looked past all that, and they came up with a verdict that they felt that they would have rendered to any other person. I think the prosecutors, after that horrific sweetheart deal that came about last year that ultimately collapsed, I'd argue that David Weiss didn't want a repeat of the backlash and the clear impression that plea deal had left that there were special favors being played. So his prosecutorial team came in. It was very no nonsense. It presented an incredibly complete and pretty airtight case. And I think the judge also deserves a shout out here, Mary Ellen Noreika. There were a lot of kind of silly motions and requests to dismiss and delay, especially from the defense team. And she made it pretty clear in the front that she also was not going to let politics play a role in this. Remember, lawyer Abby Lowell spent a lot of time initially beating on the claim that somehow his client had been singled out and this wouldn't have been brought if it had been other people. And she just ran the court case again like this was any American. I think a lot of people come out of this looking pretty good.
The next step here is sentencing, Bill. And my understanding is that these 3 felonies could, in theory, provide a sentence of up to 25 years, but there's some reporting that suggests that first-time offenders might get no jail time. The sentencing will take place at a later date. It's usually within something like 120 days of the guilty verdict, and so you could have the sentence coming down, Bill, right in the heat of the presidential election and creating another political problem for Joe Biden. And then, by the way, don't forget that the other trial of Hunter Biden on these tax charges is still coming later this fall as well.
Yeah, I think that's actually kind of bigger development. No one knows whether he'll get jail time. My understanding is that there's no minimum jail time for these offenses. But having passed up the opportunity for a plea, and to show some contrition, he's in a weaker position than he was before to argue for no jail time. And then, of course, he has the other trial right on top of him. So we can second guess what the judge is going to say from now till eternity, but we don't know. But it is a hit. And just looking at it, it looks to me as though Team Biden was really shocked. They shouldn't have been by the facts, but I think they were really counting on the jury to not be able to reach a verdict. And I think this really changes the landscape.
Kim, what do you make of the routes for Hunter Biden to appeal? One of them that his defense team had already signaled is appealing under the Second Amendment. There was a landmark Supreme Court case in recent years called New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen. And that opinion by Justice Clarence Thomas said that in order to be upheld, regulations on guns have to be rooted in America's tradition and historical precedent. And so you could see some kind of an appeal coming up. As I said, the defense has already signaled that it intends to raise these arguments that this law under which Hunter Biden has been prosecuted is not the kind of regulation that has that kind of deep rooting, that the founders would not have stood by requiring anyone who wants to buy a firearm to fill out some kind of federal paperwork and check a box if they use an illegal substance. Kim, what do you make of that?
The defense team wanted to litigate that argument in this trial. And I think Judge Noreika very wisely said this is neither the place nor the time nor the forum for us to be having a massive Second Amendment argument about the historical and constitutional basis of the Second Amendment. This is something that will probably go up to the high court at some point. Whether or not it's Hunter's case that provokes it is an unknown question. It has made for some very peculiar bedfellows where you have prominent gun rights activists tweeting in support of Hunter Biden and this argument. Look, I mean, I think that if we really want to go into the legal issues here, this would be a strange call. I mean, maybe the Supreme Court would come down on the argument, since we never had gun forms in the past, you can't have them now. But I think one thing that was interesting about this debate is that if you asked most Americans, I would argue even responsible gun owners, many of them, they would, I think, be a little uncomfortable with the notion that, there's no problem whatsoever about having straight up addicts access to any firearms they want. A principal argument of gun owners is that they are responsible. And by definition, addicts don't tend to be very responsible. So I don't know where this is actually headed in terms of the courts. It was an interesting gambit by Abbe Lowell to bring it up, not one that's worked for him so far. And all of this, can I just point out, may well become moot because despite Joe Biden's claims that he's not going to pardon his son, that is, of course, what you would expect him to say in the run-up to an election because it would reflect very poorly on him if he were to do so. But I think all bets are off once the election is over, and especially if Joe Biden loses, because what else does he have to lose?